Hello and welcome to Chapter 3. Today we are going to talk about the beginning of the research process. This includes both research questions and literature reviews. In essence, we're looking at three different things. First, the attributes of promising research topics. Second, discovering topics and research questions. And third, reviewing literature and writing reviews. We begin by asking which are the appropriate questions for us to ask and answer. In essence, the hypothesis is the answer to our research question. And the hypothesis is also a specification, a deduction from theory. So what do we want to see in our research question? First and foremost, it should be engaging and specific. Maybe it's only engaging and specific for you. Ideally, it would have relevance to more than just your own interests. After all, we are engaged in a discipline where supposedly we share certain interests, at least when spoken broadly. One of those shared interests is that we are engaged in political science, or some of you might quite specifically say international affairs. A political scientist, being an empire builder that he is, would probably say that international affairs is the politics of the international community. But if you're interested in math, or you're interested in Jupiter going around and around in circles, then probably this class is not going to be ideal for you. We are looking to be focused on a political topic, a political science, international affairs, or quite often comparative politics idea. It shouldn't be unduly concerned with discrete facts. We're not interested so much in one specific case from one specific time in one specific place. We want something that's generalizable. Now you might focus on one place. You might focus on Peru if you're trying to talk about South America, because South America is a large place. And maybe there's things about Peru that are generalizable to all of South America, or maybe even to all the world. Doesn't matter whether the actual focus of your research is specific, but the outcome, the purpose of your research should probably be somewhat broader. And we shouldn't be focused on reaching what are called normative conclusions. We aren't trying to figure out what's better. If your research question ends up being, what should we do? Then you probably are better suited to be taking a public policy analysis course, something that I teach in the spring. But if you're interested in a scientific inquiry into why the political world works the way it does, then you're going to want a question that is about the way things are rather than the way things ought to be. So where are the sources for your ideas for research topics? On some level, they're all personal. I would hate it if you were studying something that you absolutely do not care about. Now, maybe political science isn't the thing for you if there is only one small aspect of political science that you care about. If you are studying political science only because you're interested in the progressive era of the 1890s, maybe you're more suited for history. Maybe you're more suited to just go get a book somewhere about that period of time and then go study psychology or some such. Political science is a study of the way all of these different political events and political institutions and rules and enforcement mechanisms fit together. They can be across time, it can be across place, but it's a science, right? If you say, I'm only interested in how Jupiter orbits the sun, and I have no interest in how Saturn does, then you're probably, you're probably more of an astrologer, right, than a physicist. You might have as the source of your ideas scholarly works. Now, I would suggest that wherever else your research starts, you should look to see what scholarly sources are saying. You probably are presented this information in a way you never have been before, where I say, start to browse past research and see what interests you. The other way that you are going to bring scholarly research in is you're going to decide what you care about and then go search the literature to see if you can find it. And in either case, you're going to have to find a match with what really exists in research and the personal. One thing that I would strongly discourage from everyone is to have an idea of how the research should come out and only looking for articles that tell you what you hope and expect to hear. Finally, you might find your research from non-scholarly sources. Maybe you pick up a journalistic effort like the New York Times, and they're yammering on about one thing or another. And you might say, does the world really work the way the New York Times suggests? Or maybe you watched a political convention and you heard somebody say something and you said, is that really true? You need to guard against doing research where it's just a question of a number. If a person says, how much money does the average American have? Well, you go look that up. Maybe you make it into a 5-page paper where you look at 2 or 3 different ways that you can measure how much money people have. But nevertheless, that's not really a research paper. That's certainly not an empirical research paper. Obviously, we probably need to use some combination of all of these. And when you're looking and you find a scholarly article, remember, I'm not asking you just because the only thing that you could find about parliamentary systems was about Canada. That doesn't mean that you couldn't write a paper about the impact of parliamentary systems in places where they don't currently exist, for instance. You can look across and generalize from the research you do. One of the great political science endeavors is to find the way something works in one country and try to see whether it will work in another country. So once you have a research question, the next step is to conduct a literature review to try to find what has been written about the subject that interests you. After all, you have a question, and now you need to have an answer. And so you need to look at what has and has not been investigated related to your research question. You need to develop general explanations. You probably have an idea of what you thought would be the answer. Oftentimes, our research interests stem from having an answer that you find in the scholarly research, and you say, well, wait a second, I don't know if I think that's true. You can look to potential relationships between concepts. And finally, you can look at how others have defined and measured key concepts. Now, literature reviews are largely about identifying where there is a theory or there are competing theories to explain the way the world works. But you could also use a literature review to identify data sources. Previous research will have used data. They will have gathered it themselves, and sometimes that data is available to you, and you just need to see whether you want to apply it in a slightly different way. You can develop alternative research designs. Sometimes someone might have done an experiment, and you say, well, yes, this was great for what it was, but I want to understand why there was this difference. So maybe my research, rather than conducting an experiment or conducting a survey with close-ended questions, I'll have a survey with open-ended questions and try to uncover more. Or I will do a case study, or I will actually get involved in the day-to-day operations of an organization and to see how they work and interact with others. There's many different alternative ways to do the same research, and if there is truth in the original research, you would expect to be able to find more important information and truth by doing something similar, but trying to uncover the same concepts. And of course, it says here, discover relation with the work of others. We sometimes say you need to place your paper within the literature. You need to say, if I'm right, what will it affect? After all, if you throw a tennis ball into a spider web, the tennis ball will keep going, but it will certainly disturb the spider web somewhat. So how are we going to collect sources for a literature review? In our paper, we are looking to have a specific number of sources. Do you guys remember what that was? This semester it's 18. You can have 20, I won't mind. But the fewer sources you have, the more you're just telling me the story of those sources that you checked. Whereas the more sources that you're able to incorporate thematically into a discussion of the literature and a discussion of the theory, the more you're giving me a broad idea of everything. You can usually find a single friend in the crowd. But if only one paper has ever been published that agrees with you, then I'm probably right to have a certain skepticism. Now, you could probably present information as to why that one particular paper is so amazing that its work supersedes everything that's been done before. But, quickly, when somebody comes up with a great new idea, people either challenge it and can't find a reason to disagree, or they write something to agree with it and bolster that argument. If the only two people who have ever agreed with you are you and one other author, then you need to present the counter argument, and you need to present a plausible reason, usually related to the way other research has been done. Sometimes you go cross-disciplinary. Sometimes you look at further work by that same author. But you need to give some reason why you would think that you could be right, because people are wrong all the time. And, citing something wrong makes you wrong. It doesn't make you right. So your book is a fan of Google Scholar. It's a book suggestion, not mine. Remember, we've talked about JSTOR and how JSTOR is a safe harbor for this class. But in any case, you need to identify the relevant scholarly literature. Now, finding one really good article, and you know, I've talked to several students this semester already. If you look at and find an article, and that article doesn't have a number of academic citations, no matter how right it is, you're walking on the ledge without a net, because you're going to have to go and find on your own all sorts of sources. However, if you find an academic article in JSTOR, and that academic article has an extensive reference section, and you start to look at the articles that are cited in that reference section, they too should have sources. You actually, by the time you've iterated this 3, 4, 5 times, you'll have an embarrassment of riches. You're going to have to cut yourself short. You're going to say, yes, I could find 100 sources, but perhaps I need to limit myself to, say, 30, from which I'm going to look at them closely and find the 18 or 20 that I want to actually use. And JSTOR is very good for this, not because JSTOR casts the net widely, but rather because JSTOR casts the net narrowly. And so the articles that you find, right? Google, just Google some word, and you're going to find 3 million hits. Wouldn't it be better to find 18 hits that were exactly the ones you wanted? Well, it would be better than 3 million to find 200 or 300 that exactly hit. Ultimately, there's no substitute for actually doing some reading. Most of the reading you do can be of the abstracts of articles, just to see if they're even on the right page, even if they're even close to what might interest you. Now, I say, don't cast something aside just because it's research about a different country or different region that interests you. Don't cast something aside just because it's from a different time period than what interests you, until you see what generalizable concepts are actually being applied. If you're doing snowball research based on an article that you originally cared about, then you're looking at its bibliography. Remember, everything in that bibliography, everything on that reference page, is something that the author of the article that you cared about felt was relevant to his argument. And if you take some of the articles from that citation, from that reference page, and you look at their citations, what are you seeing? You're seeing articles that helped build the articles that helped build the paper that you cared about. Anyway, it'll help you too by being able to put together a set of articles that fit together and could become your base of knowledge about the topic. Another thing I would recommend, and I recommend this to students when we're face-to-face, is I actually go onto the whiteboard and I draw a big box. And on the left side of the box is where the older articles would go. On the right side of the box is where the newer articles would go. And from right to left, we move from new to old. And then at the top of the box are the articles that agree with my initial article. And at the bottom of the box are the articles that disagree. And so we chart them from agree to disagree. So something that is both new and agrees is in the upper right-hand corner, and something that is old and disagrees is in the lower left. And all I try to do from there is I try to see where the different articles tend to congregate. And by the time you have 16, 18, 20 articles, you're going to see a pattern. Don't have 20 articles or 16 articles or 18 articles that don't agree with each other, that don't talk about the same things. They can not all agree with each other, but you should start to wonder if they don't agree with any of the others. Now, how do we actually write a literature review? And there's two different approaches. One that is the bane of the existence of students and faculty everywhere, which is method one. And method one does very little to help you categorize and understand the literature review that you're doing. It, for all intents and purposes, should really just be an annotated bibliography. And if I wanted an annotated bibliography, I would have required one. An annotated bibliography is just where you write up to about a paragraph explanation of each of the different articles. We don't care. Method one says focus on individual references, and I say that often leads to disjointed, unfocused, and atheoretical inquiry. You get so many articles that say, the first article said this, then the second article said this, then the third article said, you do see where 24 times 18 transitions like that would probably make a reader, hate political science. Method two is both more professional and more useful to you. You don't focus on the articles, rather you focus on the concepts that the articles illuminate. So if you have 3 or 4 articles that talk about a certain concept, then that's a concept that's integral to an understanding of your topic. So you have concepts, ideas, and methods, all of which get mentioned as you tell the story of what is believed generally. And sometimes what is believed generally is that there's a conflict between 2 ideas. Or maybe there's 3 ideas that are all competing for supremacy. When I first was studying Congress in the United States, there was this dispute over whether political parties, had a great deal of influence over the day-to-day operations of the House of Representatives. And so you might say, well, today the parties have become much more powerful, and therefore, obviously, they control what happens. Heck, you don't even have to show up to vote anymore, and the Speaker of the House can vote for you by proxy, apparently. But at the time, there was a suggestion that said that the median voter, the 218th member of Congress, whatever that person wanted was what normally would happen. And it's generally been accepted that the leadership is given power in Congress to control the agenda, and that it's not what the 218th person wants, but it is what the majority party wants. Even if it doesn't have the whole 218 votes, it can stop anything from coming onto the agenda that it opposes. You could debate that, but at the time that I started studying it, about 15 years ago, there was definitely a conflict in the literature about who was right and who was wrong. You had Dave Rohde, who was a advisor of mine, was on the one side, and this guy named Keith Crable, who was actually a pretty good friend of Dave Rohde's, was on the other. And so it really felt exciting to be in graduate school and to listen to a guy who was part of the argument. Well, anyway, whatever the overall feel of the discipline about your question is what we care about, not just the particular articles. And so you will come up and you will talk about the concepts and ideas, and then you'll cite the articles where you found out about those concepts and ideas in your literature review. And it becomes very effective and is strongly preferred. So what does a literature review look like? Well, first of all, we know that in our class we want to follow the style and citation guidelines of the American Political Science Association Style Manual. And APSA, as we say, uses in-text citations. Sometimes these are called parenthetical citations or internal citations. And I've heard them called attributions. And I'm sure there's others that I'm missing. But in essence, you have those parentheses and it says the name of the author and the date of the publication. And if it's just the general gist of what's been said, then that's all you need. But if there's a particular passage that you're either quoting or closely paraphrasing, then after the year, you should put a comma, and then you should put the page or pages where you found that concept. The big difference between the APSA style manual and the Chicago manual style, which some of you might be familiar with, is the Chicago manual style uses footnotes, and we don't use footnotes. There should be a citation for every paragraph that contains outside information. And whereas you might have some ideas of your own, remember we've talked in class before about the danger of walking alone on the dark streets. People will say, this is a person who's a sophomore, junior, senior at Kennesaw State. We respect them as people, but we don't necessarily respect them as famous scholars. And you say, aha, but I'm not just me. Look at this other research that I've done. So the question is whether you should have any paragraphs in a short literature review like this that do not have citations. You need 18 sources and you only have 7 pages? Why would you write a whole paragraph where you didn't have a source? One of the things you're doing is you're making an argument for the scientific or political scientific relevance of what you're writing about. So you need to include paragraphs, well, maybe at least a paragraph, but maybe every paragraph does this in part, establishing discipline-specific theoretical and scientific relevance of your research. Sometimes we call this a why should I care paragraph. After all, you've seen in JSTOR, there's thousands upon thousands of articles that you could read. Why would you read any particular one of them? Well, because it contains something important for the people who are interested in that subject as part of an academic study. Maybe the most important thing that you're trying to do in all of this is build a theory. And you need to include components of your theoretical perspective. So if you lay out 2 competing theories, now it might be that there's not 2 competing theories. Maybe you don't uncover 2 competing theories. Maybe what you do is you see that there's one dominant theory, and you're going to test it to see whether that dominant theory is correct. Or you're going to see that there's multiple theories, and you're going to pick one and you're going to show that it's correct. But in essence, what you have to do is you have to lay out why somebody might actually believe the theory that you've chosen. And then you should probably, if there's two competing theories that are widely respected within the field, then you should really lay out both of them. Lay out why the one you didn't choose is plausible, and then lay out why the one you did choose is even better. We aren't running a political campaign where, we aren't saying, this is the Sleepy Joe theory, or this is the dishonest New York building developer theory. We're saying this is a theory that a lot of fine, excellent political scientists accept, and this is a theory that I think rings even more true. So when you are building your theory, one thing that you should do is try to find the literature review of one of the articles that you chose for your academic journal assignment. Or I guess you could look at any article anywhere, ever. But if you're going to do work, why not have the work be in the process of developing your final paper? Right, after all, I could have made it possible that you would write you would do the academic journal assignment just so that I could know that you know how to use APSA style. And then I could have you do your research question assignment. And then I could have you pick an article. Then I could have you do a literature review. And then I'd say, okay, now pick any topic you want to write your research design about. And it's because I care about you guys that I actually say, why don't you have each of these build on the next? So anyway, if you're looking at the article, the literature review should probably be soon after the introduction, and it's the section with a lot of citations. It'll be before the data methods or data and methods section. You should look for where the author gives a broad statement about what most research what most research proposes, what most research claims, or a debate between two perspectives. And you should, as you look at this, you should try to imagine, take some of that wording, take some of that structure, abstract it to be, this is the style which somebody has used to write a literature review. And I would say one thing to remember is that most literature reviews are not called the literature review. Most of them are just a discussion of what people have already talked about in the field before. The section might begin with something like, prior research suggests. Now, I've said some of this before, but you should definitely look to see whether there's a disagreement in the literature, and if there is a disagreement in the literature, you should present both sides. Probably the purpose of your entire paper, your entire research design, will be to have an empirical test of the two approaches that will demonstrate that the side you took is correct. So you need to not create a straw man to fight. You need to present the best argument possible for the opposing viewpoint, so that when you beat it, you will have beat it at its best. In the same way as we're looking for falsifiable tests of our hypotheses, we need to try to have falsifiable comparisons between, or true comparisons, so that if our side wins, we've actually defeated the other side and not just its image. So anyway, when you're presenting contradictory information, these can be the best papers. I don't know why I said topical. That's a typo. But who cares about a topic where everyone agrees? Imagine the difference between two old men, and they're sitting on a veranda in July. Maybe I said topical because I meant tropical, right? Maybe they're in Bermuda or somewhere, and they're sitting, and the one guy says, "Sure is hot." The other guy says, "Yep." But on the other hand, maybe they get into an argument about, is it going to rain? The guy says, I'm going to play 9 holes on the golf course. And the guy says, "You damn fool, it's going to rain." Now you have something. Now, you get everything from the guy saying, "I don't know, I checked, my weatherman says it's not going to rain," to, they pull out swords and duel. Well, imagine that. Imagine that you are dueling against the other side, except you're using literature reviews. You might have the opportunity to either take a side, synthesize the approaches. Maybe they're both half right. And you could suggest flaws in both and create something entirely new, or certainly build upon a flaw in the one that would then make it stronger than the other. So a few other things. You can also use your literature review to talk about data and methods and where data comes from. Even when you're not using theory to create hypotheses, you may use previous work to explore how other papers have tested these hypotheses in the past. Maybe there's a problem and you're going to actually write a methods paper later. Maybe there's going to be a problem with how you're looking at something. For instance, if you were looking at 2 drugs for the treatment of a disease, maybe this is a disease that only a few people die of. And you're trying to say, well, which of these drugs works better? You're not really going to find any conclusive difference if you ask, if you test 50 people. Because, let's say 1% of the people die. Well, if you test 50 people, 25 of them you give the drug to, and 25 you give the other drug to, on average, probably everybody should survive. And if one person died, you wouldn't be shocked. And you wouldn't be shocked whichever group they were in. But on the other hand, if you tested 25,000 people, you might start to see a big difference. And so if you say, well, this close study of 50 people wasn't enough. And so maybe your literature review will show you arguments where people have said, this is this neat new research approach that I'm using that someone else hasn't. And you can talk about that as well. Maybe you want to wait till the methods section though, and you have a little bit more of a chance for me to talk to you a little bit about different methods and for you to watch some videos about them. Finally, you should read the literature review assignment. Dun, dun. I should say 707 here. Do you understand the directions? What would make it easier for you to understand? How many sources do you need? What is the theory behind your academic journal assignment article? Is it what you're going to do the paper on? Is it right? How might you find even more sources? These are all questions that you should ask as you're trying to build your literature review. There's two real components to a literature review maybe we don't want to put on paper anywhere. One, you have to know something about the literature. And two, you need to lay it out in a way that your reader will finish by understanding your take on the literature. Anyway, I wish you luck, and I'll be talking to everybody this week.